Aloha class! The second video that we're going to talk about today is another one of my favorite topics, leadership. So what is leadership? Well, it's defined as the process of directing the behavior of others toward the accomplishment of an objective. Leadership has three main components. It has a leader, it has a follower, and it has an influence. So without any one of those, you don't have leadership. Now, the central theme of leadership is getting things accomplished through people. It's influence. Now, managers are different than leaders. They're not necessarily the same, and I will try not to use them interchangeably. But management focuses on both behavioral and non-behavioral, but they're much more task associated. They make sure the job gets done. They focus on organizational processes. They are focused on those goals, accomplishing those goals. Where leadership is a subset of management, but it emphasizes on behavioral issues and behaviors in general, on influence. They care about and focus on the people doing the job. They're more concerned about the people. They want to get the job done, but they want to make sure the people are taken care of. Their focus is, again, on the people. Now, it's also important to note that you don't have to be a manager to be a leader. So you have to have a title or a specific role to be a manager, but you don't have to have a specific role to be a leader. For example, I have two little puppies at home. If you saw my welcome video, you saw those little cutie patooties. I am a leader of them because I have an influence over them. But also parents have an influence over their children, so they could be a leader. If you have a coworker that calls you, then you are in a leadership role. You have influence. If they call you to ask you for advice, I forgot to mention that, then that's a form of leadership. So keep in mind, leaders don't have to be in a management role, where managers have to be in a role typically. So that's a big difference between leadership and management. Now, there are three main types of approaches to leadership. First, to start out in the beginning with trait approaches, and this assumed that leaders were born and not made. They described leaders based on a set of characteristics. It showed inconsistency, and no one set of qualities or traits could be used to differentiate from non-leaders. Some of those common leadership traits that we saw in the early days was intelligence, or past achievement in scholarship or athletics, emotional maturity and stability, dependability, persistence, and drive, social and adaptive skills, and a desire for status and socioeconomic position. Then we saw it shift around the 1970s to a behavioral approach. And this looked at what good leaders did. So leaders exhibited two main types of behaviors, and there were two researches that were done at Ohio State as well as University of Michigan. But out of both of those big research, two things came out of it. Desirable leadership behavior is associated with strong leader emphasis on both structure and consideration, and structure being task and consideration being people. So there are two aspects to it. The undesirable leadership behavior was associated with weak leader emphasis on both dimensions. So if you have good task focus and people focus, that's really what we saw in those two studies. Then what we're seeing now is more of a situational approach to leadership. And each instance of leadership is different and requires a unique combination of the leaders, followers, and the situation that we're dealing with. So the success of the leadership depends on the function of the leader, the follower, and the situation. There's a couple of different types of leadership that we're seeing that I'd like to bring your attention to. First and foremost is transformational leadership. So we're seeing a lot of research on transformational leadership. Granted, this started out back in the 60s. It's still relevant today. Transformational leaders are inspiring organizational success by affecting followers' beliefs. They are closely related to charismatic and inspirational leadership. They raise follower awareness of organizational issues. They create a vision. They build commitment and they facilitate that organizational change. Another one is servant leadership. So in servant leadership, leaders are there to serve the follower, to help them accomplish their goals. Leaders' primary role is to help followers in quests to satisfy personal needs, aspirations, and their interests. They place high value on service of others over self-interest. They're good listeners, they're very persuasive, they're aware of their surroundings, they're very empathetic. They're what we call stewards. So servant leadership is very popular and is often taught in corporate America today as well. The last one that I want to talk about that we're starting to see more is authentic leadership. Authentic leadership started out back in Maslow, with Maslow in positive psychology. So authentic leaders entails leaders who are deeply aware of their own and others' moral perspectives. Leaders are confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, and of high moral character. So they know themselves, they know their values, and they're true to themselves. And in turn, they are true to their employees or their followers as well. So 3 leadership styles that I wanted you to be aware of that we're seeing a lot on is the transformational leaders, servant leaders, as well as authentic leadership. We also touched on the 3 main approaches. So we have trait approach to leadership, we have behavioral approach, and we have the situational approach. And last but not least, we talked about the difference between leaders and managers. And one last thing I want to talk about that is I mentioned previously that my husband and I have a podcast about leadership, and I just want to bring your attention to that. Our first topic of episode 1 was the difference between leadership and manager. So I highly recommend you listening to that. My husband's funny, so he might make you laugh a little bit. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to listen and have a great day.